If you enjoy fast-paced historical fiction, World War II French resistance stories, or a little bit of romance, I think this is the book for you. Hi, welcome. I'm Maria from Read Fine Books, and today we are talking about The Silence Before Dawn by Amanda Lees. This book was just wonderful, and the most amazing thing about it were the leading characters. They were strong, bold females in roles of power who exerted their power and responsibilities and gained respect of all others around them. They were such strong role models and inspiring figures. I was just amazed. However, before I go on, I need to add some key facts about the historical period this book is set in. We are talking about the World War II when France was occupied by the German military. In 1940, the government led by Charles de Gaulle fled France when it was occupied and established a government in exile in Britain. From there, it started and supported a French resistance movement which collaborated with the British government and that of the United States. Of course, international collaboration is tricky, and sometimes organizations, even though they may have the same common goal, they may have also some conflicting interests. So, this book underlines a bit this part of international collaboration, how tricky it was. Of course, in occupied France, the government that stayed behind was put together by Marshal Philippe Pétain, and it was a puppet government. It was a collaborationist government that started negotiations of armistice with the Germans. This government was known as Vichy France. Being a collaborationist regime, the militia, the French police, could also not be trusted. The militia would incarcerate their own and hand them over to the Germans without a second thought. So, in this environment, the French resistance was a movement that used mostly guerrilla tactics. They were supported by the British government and by the American regime as well. One of the most important secret organizations in the World War II that had operations in France was the Special Operation Executive, or the SOE. Also from the American government, we have the Counterintelligence Corps, or the SIC. This was a United States organization that trained agents to sabotage and acquire information also about communism, not only about the Germans. On the other hand, in France, you have the Maquis, or the French resistance, and other small individual groups of French resistance that only united after the Allied invasion of France in 1944. And this book talks about some events that happened before this Allied invasion. The first one is Operation Jedburgh. Operation Jedburgh consisted of three party men that were airdropped in France, and they consisted of military personnel of the SOE, the British organization. Also, you have Operation Overlord, which took place in June of 1944, that landed 2 million men, including a French armored division, and this operation on the beaches of Normandy opened up the Western Front against Germany. And the most important operation talked about in the book is Operation Dragoon, and this was to be held in August of 1944. All events in the books are around this operation, and that is why I'll stop talking about it so as to not give any spoilers. Another important figure in the book that was actually real is Klaus Barbie. Nicholas Klaus Barbie was a German operative who worked in France during the World War II. He became known as the Butcher of Lyon for personally having tortured lots and lots of prisoners, primarily Jews and members of the French resistance, as he was the head of the Gestapo in Lyon. I advise you to read him, about him and his ties with the SIC. But only after you read the book, of course, because you don't want any spoilers. So, with everything in mind, the international collaborations, the French resistance, the Gestapo, and the Butcher of Lyon, let's get into what the book is about. Firstly, we'll talk about Marianne, who is the leader of a French resistance network. While a meeting between different French networks was taking place, the meeting site was raided randomly by the Germans. This random raiding had absolutely no sense as the site was an abandoned farm and not on the Germans' radar for years. So all of a sudden they raid this place. Makes no sense unless the organization Marianne was leading had a mole. She faces this possibility as well as the news that one of her brothers died. He was the leader of another French resistance group. On top of that, her fiancé Jack Hamilton was captured by the militia and is also the possible mole of everything that happened. So, this is a lot of news. Marianne, as leader of the French network, is faced with all of this information, and we as readers are absolutely immersed in the atmosphere from the very first moment. The first and most important decision she has to make is around Jack Hamilton, her fiancé. He was also a French resistance operative and one of the most important agents of the French resistance because he held valuable, vital information about Operation Dragoon. This was supposed to be a joint operation with the French, British, and the Americans to synchronize all troops coming to France and push the Western Front back to the Germans. So, dates, places, as well as agents that would be involved in this Operation Dragoon were all held by Jack Hamilton, and that meant he needed to be rescued. Currently, he was held by the French militia, not to be trusted, because they would hand him over to the German regime as soon as possible. The German regime meaning directly handing him to the Gestapo, specifically to Klaus Barbie, for him to be tortured and interrogated. Clearly, rescuing Jack Hamilton, whether he was the mole or not, was very, very important. For a successful operation, Marianne is helped by a myriad of spies. The most powerful ones are all women, and this actually made the book like all in all a praise for women and their actions in the World War II. I loved that part, and I loved how it emphasizes their difficulty in leading men as well as in gaining their respect. It also showed how the French resistance messed with the Germans with the guerrilla tactics I was mentioning before. Their ways are ingenious and I love to read about them. So, as a historical fiction, The Silence Before Dawn managed to bring me into the atmosphere of the World War II, managed to make me more aware of the role women had in those times, and about the tactics the French resistance used on the Germans. I was impressed with all of it, frankly, and enchanted about how female leaders make decisions without hesitations, are fearless, and are able to endure a lot, at least as much as men can, for their country. What I didn't enjoy as much were how the male characters were handled in this book. They don't seem like full blown persons. There are characters uh, from whom we only know the name. We don't have for them the same well rounded approach as we do for the female characters. The males seem all sketches, no backstory, no physical details whatsoever, other than the occasional brown eyes. And there are no clear reasons for their actions, as well as no clear reasons for the main plot twist. Because there will be a plot twist, and it is a very good one. I did not expect it, but again, there is no reason for it, no clear motives for why someone became a traitor, how they betray their own, what pushes someone to believe the Nazis' narrative when you're a French person in an occupied land? These are questions I would have loved to be more deeply explored by this book, and they were a great opportunity to go deeper in the psychology of persons in an occupied land. I think the book could have been a lot more on this front. However, it did had a lot of action and great parts in it, so it is a very good read, and I'm hoping also, because this is just the first volume, this kind of things will be more explored in the second volume. This part can be read alone. I mean, I feel like most of the things have been resolved. Not everything. You are still left with lots of questions. I'm sure the second book will provide the answers to all of them as well. But it isn't an absolute must. You are left quite satisfied with the ending as it is. And a little more than that, it was a great romance. I loved the story between Marianne and Jack. It was secondary to the main story, but it provided a better understanding of the characters, and it was just a nice read as well. Yet, what I wasn't prepared in this part of the romance was explicit detail in the sex scenes. I thought it made the whole book very modern. For me specifically, it didn't vibe with the atmosphere at the time. It does contain explicit language, and I usually don't mind it. I just didn't think it fit this book and this time. I felt everything could have been enveloped in a little more magic, a little more mystery, because you have all the horrors of the war beside you. You have the torture and violence and crimes and death. You are surrounded by all that. So, in the midst of that, reading explicit sex didn't have the effect it should have had. I thought the love story would be able to provide something more idyllic to think about in the midst of all the horror. So for me, that part failed. And it wasn't the only thing that I didn't enjoy. The author also has some remarks that sound too modern, like It would be fun to see if this developed into something more than an entente cordiale. So, yes, that sounds great for the modern reader, but this is historical fiction, so not sure it fit with the whole atmosphere in the book. Again, nothing in this book was bad in itself. These are my personal opinions of what would have made the book even better. It was a fun, wonderful read, very informative, but I do advise you should expect explicit sexual language, violence, torture, all the stuff of war. And I think that should not deter you from reading the book, because I think we should face these things, at least in books. We should face them and understand them, and see what humans are capable of, because nothing I read here hasn't actually happened. Torture was actually a lot worse than what's described here, and we should be aware of what humans can do. I do recommend you pick up this book. It will be published this September, and it was an awesome read. I'm Maria from Read Fine Books. Thank you for watching.